Brought to you from historic Studio L, it's the ECHORIFT Show, your pop culture lightning rod. Each episode we bring you the best in comics, movies, television, books, fast food, and anything else our producer can think of. I'm Don, co-creator, writer, and colorist for ECHORIFT Comics.
And I'm Seth.
And I am so not used to not having Mike here that I don't know what to do. So I've already explained Mike is gone, and I don't know when he or Hans will ever be back. So I have my intro because today we're going to be talking about Manifest Destiny. In 1804, Captain Meriwether Lewis and Second Lieutenant William Clark set out on an expedition to explore the uncharted American frontier. This is the story of the monsters they encounter lurking in the wilds. But before we get to that, I need to introduce my very special guest who is pitching in to help out as I find myself solo on the ECHORIFT podcast until Mike and Hans figure out who they are. I'm joined by Seth Breedlove of the Ancillary Characters podcast and noted Bigfoot cryptozoologist. And I know that's got to be part of what interests you in Manifest Destiny, and I know, and I can't wait to hear what you think because there's got to be tie-ins.
It's true. Actually, I remember tweeting when I read that this book was a thing. I remember tweeting, "Is Sasquatch in Manifest Destiny? Because if he is, I'm buying it."
I can't imagine that he won't appear.
You know, I don't want to get into it yet because I actually have this to talk about in my notes, but I have some thoughts on that, and it actually I'm not going to get into it yet. But yeah, cryptozoologist is something I would never consider myself because... And
I don't know what the word means. I sort of know what it means, and so I'm just throwing that term around. But correct it or help me understand. Like what I know. I mean, I doubt it's a degree, right? It's
right.
Some level of expertise is required, right?
There are cryptozoology courses now being offered at some colleges, especially like little kind of local colleges. If there's someone in the community who is a professor who has an interest in this, they can actually teach a course, because I know at least two guys that are teaching courses in cryptozoology at a school right on the border of PA and Ohio. But the cryptozoology thing is it's the study of unknown animals, right? "Quote unquote" unknown animals. So by that, description, obviously there are animals discovered every year. So there's a lot of unknown animals, and there's cryptozoologists are guys like my friend Mark DeWorth, who runs the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. I don't know if he would refer to himself as a cryptozoologist, but I do, because he takes it far more seriously than I do. Not that I don't take it seriously, but in the fact that he spends a great deal of time in the field, quote unquote, that's what they call it, in the field, researching Bigfoot. And they actually go out, and they are legitimately out there trying to have some sort of encounter and run in with a giant unknown primate.
So, how much of the work of a cryptozoologist, or even someone I don't know what a Squatch fan, I don't know what the right term would be. How much of that is actually out in the field, and how much of it is really just research and pouring through things that have been written, or do you rely on the books and things that other people have assembled on the subject?
It's, for me, if you're asking like what I consider myself, I'm a writer. So the topic of Bigfoot has interested me since I was a kid. When it comes to what my title would be in Bigfootdom, I guess I consider myself a researcher, but it's almost like I'm almost interested in kind of documenting not just the subject of Bigfoot, but the people that research it, because that interests me just as much as Bigfoot does. So I have not spent a great deal of time out in the field like guys like Mark. And have you ever heard of Lauren Coleman?
I don't know. I mean, I see all your tweets, and I've read probably more than you'd think. A number
Sure,
of articles that you've clicked, that you've fed into Facebook and things like that.
sure.
So that might have been a name I've come across, but I don't know it right off the top of my
He
head.
would be like they call him the grandfather of cryptozoology. He's been around forever, and he has the cryptozoology museum in Maine,
Okay.
and he writes a lot of books and stuff like that. So that guy is hitting all points. I mean, he spends as much time on his computer researching as he does out in the field. Um,
So is cryptozoology as much about, and then we do need to get onto Manifest Destiny, but now I've just gone and done it, and I started asking questions.
open the door.
I'm very intimate with the Jersey Devil. When I moved to New Jersey, I was fascinated with the Jersey Devil, and Mike and I worked on a screenplay that was called Urban Legend before the movie Urban Legend came out. That was about the Jersey Devil, and we did a lot of research. I mean, we drove down to the Pine Barrens, but we read a number of books on it.
Mhm.
And I know one of the things that is a leading explanation for the Jersey Devil, particularly based on the most common description, is that it was a type of migratory bird that no longer exists, that is extinct. It was a large bird that was probably 6 or 7 feet tall, a crane of some kind. In fact, I forget the specific name. So is this, when you look at this kind of stuff, do you see people who are looking to prove that the Jersey Devil is the seventh son of a seventh son? Or does that qualify as cryptozoology? Is no, if that's the answer, that's what I want to know. I want to know that it was this crane, and there's more evidence to support that than otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, like, so you're asking if there's a lot of cryptozoologists who will actually, like, kind of come at the subject skeptically, or trying to actually get to the bottom of it beyond just what we want it to be.
Yeah, like is it just is a tough way to load the sentence. Is it a pastime that's fun, and it's more fun to believe than not to, or is there a degree, or is there a segment of it that's like, no, honestly, if we found out that Sasquatch is some kind of bear, I want to know that. I'd rather not wonder if it's really this animal that we've never encountered
Yeah.
before.
I think there's a lot of people that want, if we're talking about Bigfoot, I think there's a lot of people who want Bigfoot to be our space brother from the UFO who floats down. And that, I mean, seriously, like, I'm a member of a lot of Facebook Bigfoot groups, and there's a lot of people out there who say they've seen Bigfoot hopping between dimensions and going invisible and cloaking and coming down in UFOs. And if you told them, no, you saw a bear, or you didn't see anything, this is a total case of pareidolia, they probably would, cry. But there are a lot of guys, like my buddy Mark and Lauren Coleman, who do come at the subject from a much more reality-based position.
That's cool.
You know,
That's good to know.
and
I mean,
that's kind of where I come at it from. I'm not a Bigfoot believer. I think the possibility is very real, and I know people personally. In fact, I took my first Bigfoot sighting report in the last few weeks from a friend of mine from church,
okay.
and I have no explanation for what she saw.
Hmm.
So for me, it's very difficult to be like, I don't believe what you saw is what you say you saw. I think it was this or that. So it's the most fascinating topic I think you can get into, because there seemingly is no answer, no clear-cut answer.
That's fascinating, and that's one of the cool positions you're in as someone who's documenting and writing about this. And I was just advising a friend of mine who's working on a lot of things to journal his experiences. Is it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. Say in 3 years or 4 years or the rest of your life, you get to a point where you say, okay, there is or there isn't. It doesn't matter, because you're really there, like you said, to tell the stories of the people who had sightings, or the people who search for Bigfoot, or your own personal experiences. But the cool thing is there's no requirement for something to have occurred for you to be ready to publish, or for you to ready to do anything, because you're there to observe and document and experience it for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Very cool.
yeah.
All right, let's talk about Manifest Destiny. I hope we now have given ourselves enough time. Early on, we've been wanting to have Seth on for a long time, and we very specifically, Mike and I, wanted to talk about Bigfoot. And we had even talked, the three of us had even talked ahead of time, and I said, Mike and I might decide to be hard on you. And Seth was like, no, bring it. It's no problem, because, and like you just said, you're not even gonna tell us that Bigfoot is from another dimension or something. But I didn't want to do that because if Mike ever comes back, I want to have that show. So that's a teaser for that show. You've gotten Seth's origin of interest, and that brings us to Manifest Destiny. And I came to this because it's not something I think I would have picked up on my own. Seth actually gave it to us because he was so. I'm assuming, I don't want to say what you were. I guessed you were so excited by it you wanted to share it.
Yes, absolutely. This was the type of thing where as soon as I read it, for some reason I thought of you and Mike.
Well, it's probably the horror thing. I mean, particularly with Mike. I mean, it's got this great. So the setup is it's Lewis and Clark, and it's not. I heard it compared to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies or Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and I think that's a disservice.
Yes.
To this comic, it's similar in that say Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. It's similar in that it's taking a historical, factual account of things that occurred and adding a cool mystery thing that, the untold story of. But it's also not. It's not silly. It's not campy. It's just good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it strikes a very specific tone. One of my favorite things about it is it never becomes. The first thing I thought of when I read it was Sixth Gun.
Yeah, same here. Yeah,
but because it kind of has that same supernatural, historical fiction bent, but at the same time, Sixth Gun to me feels very family friendly. I wouldn't have a problem giving Sixth Gun to like a younger kid.
Yeah.
Whereas Manifest Destiny is definitely a little more gory. There's a little more adult material.
Although it's funny because one of the things that bummed me out is the artwork in it is gorgeous. It might be the best looking art I've seen come out of 2013 and 2014. Yeah. Matthew Roberts does the pencils and inks, and Owen Gianni does the colors. And the combination of the two is stunning, particularly if you do it in guided view for on an iPad or a Nexus or something, because you really get to see the panels, and I cannot get over how beautiful it is. I mean, I kept getting actually distracted sometimes by the story in the low moments when there isn't a lot of momentum and it's just talking, of just staring at the artwork.
Yeah.
And it made me think, sorry, to finish my thought, it made me a little bit bummed out that so many of the things about it that are adult are language based. It bummed me out because I thought, this almost looks like a storybook, and I wish I could share this with my kids, and
I know.
I wouldn't be able to.
I know, it's disappointing, and it's only when you're talking language, it seems to only really be coming from that one character.
Yeah.
I can't even think of what his name is.
Jensen.
Yeah, the character Jensen is.
And he's a bad guy. I mean, I get it. I mean, he's a murderer, and
right.
So the way it works, I guess maybe we should, for someone who's listening and hasn't read and needs us to tease and not just say we like it. So it's Lewis and Clark. They're heading west. The President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, has sent them on a secret mission, and we know about the official constitutional record mission of them exploring the West. But they were also sent to find and eliminate the monsters. So the crew is made up of soldiers who were offered a ton of gold and convicts who were well enough, and I guess that the government or Lewis and Clark thought they could manage well enough so that they could come along and also be sort of cannon fodder and be an extra gun.
Yeah, there's mention at one point in the book, actually Jensen points it out, that they're all men with no real families. There's no one for them to go back to. There's no one that's going to miss them if they don't come back. And I love that because there's such a building dread especially through that first issue.
Yeah. And they have that thing where you're convinced. The story opens with Lewis's journal. Lewis is sort of the brain of the two, and in his journal, he's saying, "I don't believe we're going to find anything. This is all sort of a waste of time."
Yeah, and there's this the tone. What I was talking about tonally is the book has this horror element. Definitely, I mean, there's some downright gory splash pages. I can think of one right off the top of my head, involving a hatchet to a man's head. That it strikes this tone though of horror, but it's also very. I don't want to say Indiana Jones adventure, but it's definitely an adventure. I mean, it's an adventure story trapped with the trappings of a horror
And that
kind of
really,
story.
that's my favorite kind of horror, because even
Hmm.
though, like you said, there's a couple of sequences of gore, because I don't like, I don't want to debate horror, but I'm not technically a horror fan,
Hmm.
but I do like elements of horror, and I feel like this strikes that balance. So one of the things that they run into, the monsters, and I'm sure we'll more specifically mention them as we go, they're gross, but they're not. They're somehow alien enough. Like, for example, they run into zombies, and there's zombies that are created. They're not really zombies. I'm using that word because there's no better word to describe them. But plant life. There's some virus where a plant gets inside of you as a person, and the plant life takes over, and you basically become fauna. And with fighting them, they're like the undead. They're very much like zombies. You can cut their arms, you can cut whatever, and nothing's going to happen. And with them, instead of chopping their heads off, it's about burning them, because they're plants. So the burning is going to work every time. It's gross, but it's not gross. I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's handled so well.
Yeah. Yeah, there are pages and scenes in the book where it does go pretty far with the gore, but the zombies, the way they handled the quote unquote zombies has been pretty awesome. I will say the zombies are my least favorite part of the book because I feel like I've seen that before.
See, and I know what you're talking about, but I feel like one of the way this first volume ends, and I don't know what the story is. I'm assuming there'll be an issue 7. Volume 1 is issues 1 through 6, but it ends with a neat story arc where they're moving on to the next location, and in the first location, they run into this. There's a running gag that they call them minotaurs, but they're not. They're almost like the buffalo equivalent or bison equivalent of minotaurs. There's male and female in the race. They use weapons, so there's somewhere between a centaur and a minotaur, and they run into that. They run into this plant creature, this plant virus, and they run into a woman that's never explained. The woman who throws herself off of a cliff,
Oh
and when
man, I wrote down in my notes about that scene because there's something so unsettling about that scene in general. Just like I was thinking of that scene when I was reading it in the book as if that was a movie or if it was even real life, and you're seeing this woman in the distance on this cliff, and then she just throws herself off, and
yeah,
then when they show up at the scene where she landed, like they come to the place where she would have landed, her body is kind of there's plant growth on the ground in the shape of her body.
yeah, and what's neat, I was read because I always, whenever we do a show, I tend to pretty much read everything twice. Sometimes the second time is a glance through. And when I went back and read it again with the end of the volume in mind, it struck me that her presence is not quite explained by the larger threat of the zombies.
Hmm.
And by the end of this, we have no explanation for the bison minotaur people either. They're just moving on, and I love the prospect, and that's why I'd made the comment about Bigfoot's got to show up. It looks like they're just going to move on, and I think that what we're shown in this volume is the context for, okay, America is a really weird place.
Hmm.
It isn't going to be, because I'm presuming that this isn't going to go alternate into the future, alternate history. That one of the things I bank on is that none of this will be the case by the time they get back, which is why we have the history we have now, and that it's just going to get weirder and weirder.
Yeah, one of this is what I was talking about early on though. One of the things I loved about this book is that when I was, initially coming into it, I was like, man, I really hope I see like the Lake Ogopogo monster and like Bigfoot and the Mothman or something like that. And as I'm reading it, they're inventing these creatures and this mythology that is so fascinating on its own outside of that kind of cryptozoological thing that I would have expected them to bring to the table. Like I would have expected them to use common folklore, like stuff we're aware of or stuff that's already established. And instead they brought these creatures into it, like the minotaurs or whatever. They're so fascinating to look at, and the different things like the St. Louis Arch that's made
Yeah,
out
yeah.
of like this creepy shrubbery and trees, and I kind of am to the point now where I kind of hope they don't bring in the stuff I would expect like Bigfoot.
You know, it's funny. I think you're right, because I think the thing that was so appealing to me was that it wasn't getting. Like, it might not have been as successful if it was things that I could call back to, and maybe them doing their own thing, because it makes it so much more bizarre and so
Hmm.
much stranger that it's these things I never could have guessed. I mean, just the idea of the Buffalo Minotaur people running around in the United States is just insane. Like, that's not sane for the rest of the world. So why would North America have something like that, even though they've never been that far west? And so you're right. Maybe it's better that it doesn't, because you mentioned the St. Louis Arch. That's the first thing that you see, and it might be on page 7 or 8, where you've already been established. You've been introduced to Lewis and Clark, and you've been introduced to the fact that Lewis thinks they're on they're just really exploring. They're not actually going to find anything. And then they find this arch, and I'm convinced that that's where the St. Louis Arch is supposed to be, like, or where it is today. And I love the idea. It's like very Planet of the Apes. Like, what? Because in the story, it's made of trees and grass and things, not metal.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with the atmosphere created as well. I mean, there's a real sense of like foreboding through that first issue, and it never really goes away because actually, one of the good things, I'm not a fan of gore, but the pages in that first issue, or the one splash page of that, and I know there's another issue very similar to it in issue, I think it's number 3. When you see what the Minotaurs will do to someone,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, there is a sense of dread that builds from that never goes away, and it's similar to what happens once the plant zombie people or whatever show up as well, because you don't see books that can kind of involve you at least not at the level that I feel involved when I'm reading Manifest Destiny.
Now, here's a question for you. Do you think, obviously, the writing and the art are combined, but how much of the feeling, I was having trouble as I was trying to answer this question for myself, how much of this is because is because of the artwork, or am I underselling the great writing by noting that the art, like, it has a literary quality to it almost?
Hmm.
And I wondered how much of it is like with different art, and I don't mean incompetent art. I just mean with different art. Would it feel quite as powerful, or is that really this, or maybe it's just this perfect marriage between the writing and the art?
I think it is. I think this is one of those, and again, like I would harken back to Sixth Gun, because I feel this way about Sixth Gun or Hellboy, or this is like a perfect marriage of art and writing. I can't see this book working as well as it does with someone else drawing it, and it's the art in the book does such a good job too of softening the story a little bit. It's not overly, detailed or not horrific, but it's not overly detailed, and it's not realism. It's that kind of cartoony. I mean, you're
Yeah.
the artist. I'm not.
No, you're right, and I don't know the word to say it, but you're
Yeah.
right. I mean, because if I were to say cartoony and you haven't seen it, I think you'd be surprised when you do.
Mhm.
But for example, Jensen, we talked about, he has a very distinct face. He has very exaggerated features. His face is very rat-like, and he's got this sort of big nose. And the other convict that he runs around with is this big, tall, blonde-haired guy, and he also has this very particular appearance. And Lewis and Clark, I mean, it was just brilliant. I don't know what they look like in real life, but one's blonde and one has dark hair, and one's taller than the other. You can spot them from a mile away. They're very iconic. They're very visual. They're both the handsome, dashing leaders, and they should be. But one is the brainier one, and the other one's the brawnier one. And everything about every decision. And then the women, I mean, it's funny. The one thing I thought about is some of the women are a little too bodacious, even though they're wearing their like prairie dresses. When they go to the fort, and then they get to the fort and find it abandoned, and that's when they run into the green zombies. They run into the people who are left, and the one woman comes out, and she's like real busty, and I was just like, all right, this is not quite what I expected, but it works though, because again, it goes to that cartoony exaggeration that she's a French woman and she's on the frontier, and this is that, ooh la la, that's what you think of with French women, and she's going to be beautiful, and so it really does kind of work.
And they bring in Sacagawea.
Yeah.
How you say it? And it's such a unique take on that character, as most things are in this book, as far as the way they're approaching this particular story. And her introduction is awesome. And
Yeah.
it pays off. She pays off again before the book ends, or before this first, I guess, collection, if you're going 1 to 6 ends. She's got some great moments.
And on top of
And
that, she's really not been explored that much. Like,
yeah.
you've only seen so much of her.
hmm Yeah, um, one of the things I was talking about with the tone is there's enough humor here as well that the darkness in the book never feels overwhelming.
No, you're right. I mean, there's the running gag of the Minotaur, and
hmm
there's some other little jokes between the soldiers and things that you're right. They keep, and that's so important. Like when something is too dire, or with everybody hates each other, or any of these other things, it really just brings the story down. And this has all of it.
And I'm really, really excited to see where they're going to go because to me they've opened a window here where they can go in any direction now that I mean the story is about monster hunters disguised as explorers essentially.
Yeah,
So I mean they're going into the West to tame it. And it's not just like they're taming, you hear the stories of the men that tamed the West and you're dealing with that same kind of world in that I'm imagining there's probably going to be bears and all the dangers that would have faced the actual guys exploring the West. But then you're adding into it like these killer minotaur and
yeah.
zombie plant creatures, and so they're facing all that stuff, and they can do anything with the story. And we haven't even. I'm really curious to see what they're going to do with like Native Americans.
Yeah, because I was just going to say that. It was one of the things I thought of. I really like how unapologetically the story presents the points of view of white men of that time.
hmm
And there's a class system within the explorers. I mean, there's the officers, and they're the best. And well, there's Lewis and Clark at the top, and then there's the officers. Then there's the proper army. Then there is the convicts, and then there's this one slave.
hmm
And that's sort of this pecking order, and they have a very particular. I mean, their reaction to seeing the St. Louis Arch was it's probably something they tie their squaws to and pray for rain. Yet there's this foreshadowing. Like at one point, Clark mentions Clark's the military, more military of the two. And he earlier in the story foreshadows something about they're referring to the time they drove all those the Indians
Off the
in their
cliff.
terms off the cliff, and then later there's a dream sequence, and that you get some insight into what's going on in Clark's head, and all he seems to like it seems to weigh on him badly. Like he is expecting to pay in the afterlife for what he's done.
hmm
And it really adds this really deep and interesting foreshadow, and it makes him even more three-dimensional character. But no one's like, sometimes I think authors don't have that confidence, and they want to write the story where, well, their characters were the sort of ones that didn't see Native Americans as subhuman, and they didn't believe in slaves. And they're not doing that at all. They're telling the story just, they're trying to keep it quote unquote real, and it
hmm
makes it a better story despite being unpleasant, and, for those aspects.
Yeah, I never would have believed that I would have still been buying this series monthly when I read the first issue, just because typically with Image titles I buy a first issue and I'll either love it or hate it. Usually I'll end up loving it, and then I buy them in collections and I read them collected, every few months. And this is one title where I love picking it up month by month. And
Yeah, it reads really well monthly, and so many comics don't,
Mhm.
particularly ones that are told in story arcs like this one is.
Yeah, yeah, and it always ends on these cliffhangers that make me really excited to know what's going to happen next.
And this is another one where I hope they put out that oversized, like full size page. I mean, the artwork is so beautiful. Like, I mean, again, some of the monstery stuff you really couldn't put it on at least if you have kids, you couldn't put it on your coffee table. But the artwork is so beautiful. Like, I need to get more of it.
I compared this to Lost when I first read it, in that there's the mystery of everything that's going on really reminds me, at least tonally, a little bit of Lost, like early on.
Yeah, it does, and except for with the difference that it gives you more reveal. But you're right. I mean, as far as like noises in the woods and not knowing what they are and things like that, it really does have that vibe. And I really do think that if you loved Lost or if you dug any of that kind of stuff, but I really think it casts a wide net, because if you like The Walking Dead, you'll probably like this, and if you like zombie horror, or I said that same thing twice. But I mean, if you like horror or historical fiction or alt history stuff, I mean, it really hits a lot of marks, and I can see this being a big breakout hit into the, with the norms.
Definitely.
All right, Seth, thank you very much for sticking with me tonight and helping me have a show without a co-host. I think I'm going to have to call on you to come back as well, but we're going to keep on this, and I really appreciate you being available to us to keep the show going.
No problem.
Mike will return. I'm sure of it. He will knock some sense into Hans's head, and we will get this all straight. So I am Don. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Don_Garvey.
And you can find me on Twitter as well. I'm at Seth Breeds Love.
You thought it was time for you to take a break because I was going to do all the outro stuff.
I was drinking
Seth was
my
like
water.
half drink after all the talking we've been doing. Go to ECHORIFT.com and check out previous episodes of this show. Go to AncillaryCharacters.com and check out Seth's show. And you can always call us, 856-208-RIFT, or leave us a letter at letters@ECHORIFT.com. Any final words, Seth?
You can also find my Bigfoot blog, sasswhat.blogspot.com.
See, I should have asked ahead of time. I didn't even think of that.
That's okay.
Till next time.
This has been an ECHORIFT production. Go to ECHORIFT.com to learn more.